Well, good morning. I thought I'd just share some reflections from the last couple days. As I've mentioned, I'm about to hit 2 years of reading a book a day. And when I say that, I mean, if I were someone who was just trying to read a book a day and didn't care about what, right, I could pick all day long, 2 hours, 3 hour, 4 hour long books. But I just finished reading Carl Jung's The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. And I've read it twice now. This is why I mention it. So I spent a few days on it, but I was lucky yesterday I had to do some commuting into the big city. So I spent lots of downtime. I was able to put in both earbuds and really get into this material. And the takeaway is a lot of people ask me, what's my favorite Jung? I've mentioned this before, right? Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I recommend that because it's got the most guidance for us today. It really is well titled, as opposed to, say, The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. I think that's really poorly titled. I think it should just be The Varieties of Human Experience, because he ends up really outlining how being human is to be religious, but not in the sense you think. Very much Nietzschean in the sense of Willenmacht. This is what he meant by will to power. What he really meant was religio is the path we follow with devotion and commitment. It is our religion. It is our path. It is our telos, our telemetry. It's what guides us. It's our ethos. It's our what we believe, which is pistis in Greek. It's the same idea in Hebrew, same idea in Sanskrit, where it's shraddha. It's closer to trust, right? Pisteus is a form of the Greek word that means to be convinced, not to believe blindly. But this, now that I've become much more versed on some of these ideas, now I would say, wow, for me, Carl Jung's work when it comes to individuation, which is really heavily, essentially the takeaway of Carl Jung's The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, really is about individuation. Different sections about different ideas, like the mandalas. What was some of the earlier stuff in the book? Like the archetypes, it's explaining. I like how he explained that you can't limit it to one idea, that these archetypes can take, what did he call it, a multifold, almost like a technicolor dream coat that it can put on. So it can take many different forms, but it's still this archetype. I guess the example I might use would be like the mother. It can be, something as like a Durga, something like Kali, this feminine, wrathful spirit, or it can be Avalokitesvara, Kanon in Japanese, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And I believe that it's actually even better. You could look at, is it Mahavira? This deity who can take both wrathful and compassionate forms. But it all works towards this idea of individuation. It goes back to the Greeks. I just finished watching an excellent piece on early Sufis in Spain and how they were very much into this oneness idea that is Vedanta, that is Shaivism, that is early Judaism, not really proto-early. I just mean If you look at Judaism before they get all obsessed with the laws, really the goal is to unite with our divinity within us, right? It's not something external, right? So, I mean, you don't want to call that monism. I don't care. But it's this idea that everything's infused with the divinity makes it resonate with all. I mean, it reminds me of Swami Vivekananda at the Congress of World Religions, right? We know a lot about his opening statement, but if you read some of his other speeches, he mentions this idea of all religions are true. And as my wife pointed out this morning when we were talking, it can't be horrible, right? And it can't be bad people, but that's not a religion then, right? Religion is individuation. It is being better than your previous self. But as Hemingway said, that's not honorable if it's gauging yourself against someone else. And the quote is, it's not honorable to be better than someone else. It's only honorable to be better than your previous self. This is Martin Buber's I and thou, this idea that we're not truly ourselves outside of the context of us, of we, right? I need to know who I am based on who you are, because I'm not you, you're not me. But as the Isha or Isha Spanishad says, that a true understanding of this world, of our existence, of our lot, is that we must see ourselves in the other, and we must see the other in ourselves. Right? That's individuation. It's not separate from everyone else. It's not a part of. This is why I mentioned this idea of identity versus myth. You can't individuate yourself based on someone else's story. Just like Jung explains, these archetypes are not cookie cutters to be placed on top. What they're meant is to give you a deeper understanding and context and I mean, arguably where he thinks inference or induction comes from, where it may not be from on high. It may just be this super intelligence that we have, super. Well, actually, William James thought that we tapped into some sort of extra sensory intelligence or consciousness, and I don't see that as being all that weird of a way to explain having the most powerful supercomputer at your hands, but it's untrained. Right? This is why we learn to read. This is why we learn to think. This is why we need to write our own myth, is because until we design who and what we are, again, within context, we're not anything. And this is why I think we're seeing with the truth that 90% of people are only reading one book in the last 2 years, why we're seeing so many people that are what they joke and call a non-player character. But here's Huxley's little sad truth, that worse than knowing we could learn from history and that we won't, worse than that is knowing all of this, knowing this truth. We also have to realize that the real truth is that no matter how many times we tell ourselves that we can learn from history, we can even remind ourselves of history, we will not learn from it. We will continue. That's the sad truth, that we will continue to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. This is, I think, what Nietzsche was trying to talk about with ressentiment. This idea of his camel into the lion, into the child. Because until you transvaluate all values, until you actually wake up to the present moment and go, wait a minute, is what I think, what I do, how I react, is my action, is my desire, is my preference in the serving of that filter we talked about? Is it true? Is it better? Is it that idea? Like, as I've tried to say, I think I said yesterday morning, this idea that all of this boils down to being a better you, but it also boils down to finding out what is closer to true. And how do we do this? This is this via negativa or negativo. I can't remember the context. They're the negative path. It's very much like the Canadian identity. I've mentioned this, right? Why it's difficult to pinpoint what is Canadian is because we define what and who we are by what we're not. Right? And that's how we judge, right, some of these ideas. And so without this context of them and us, me and you, you're not able to individuate. It's like I've said so many times on this podcast that when you dehumanize another human being, all it serves to do is denature your own humanity. And what I mean by that is what I think Martin Buber spent an entire book trying to explain, and I keep rattling on about, is this simple truth that even the Upanishads understood this. That if our goal is to figure out who are we, who am I, forget about being a better person. First, you need to figure out who the heck you are before you can even understand and maybe dismantle, as Nietzsche said, right? Realize you're the camel, just carrying expectations, carrying previous reactionary toolkit, right? If someone betrays me, I'm going to react this way. You need to realize you're the camel first before you can, offload some of those traditions, those that peer pressure from dead people, right? But here's the rub: you need to know who you are, but you can only do that by figuring out what it is you're not. Right? So you try on. I've said this before. Don't look too closely to your idols because they'll disappoint you. But you do shoot for these ideas. I've said this a million times before, this idea of a moonshot goal, right? If you're a long jumper, you're going to shoot for further than you can achieve because you're going to, land further. Or like they teach you in boxing that you don't aim for the person's face, you aim for behind their head, right? Otherwise, you're going to pull short. Right? This leap forward is always within context. That's what's funny. It makes the VP statement about did you fall out of a coconut tree? I mean, you're in, the context and the time you're in, and it actually is very true. I've said this before in Japanese. From the Kyoto school, they developed this idea of basho, very similar to Jung's idea of place. That if you're not present, if you're not aware, then you're not actually authentic. You're not individuating. That's what we're trying to do here, right? You're lost off in space somewhere, right? But this is the problem, right? Even the idea of basho loses the context of self and other, because the character shows one warrior ready for battle, and the other character is the place of battle. But again, this is what's beautiful about this language, because it goes way back to what I'm more familiar with, like the Oracle bone scripts and the old I Ching characters that had a myth behind them. So it was talking about your battles, your challenges, and honestly, what's beautiful is, what is it? What would I translate it as? Multitude in the old script actually meant the army and the civilian population at once. It meant the same thing, right? It's society, right? And I guess there's an argument could be made: have we denatured um, some of our own traditional institutions by separating them as we have? I've said this many times before that I think the over militarization of our police force was a major failure here, especially in the West, and I think we're seeing it come to pass. I said this years ago because I saw it in a very unique little isolated case, and there was no need for them to do it because they don't really deal with crime per se, and yet they started to dress like jackbooted, paramilitary SWAT teams, and they were just, essentially glorified armored car drivers. Because we've seen from history that you can't police a population with outsiders, right? I mean, I've given examples with the Yahtzees, but forget that. That's become cliche, and so much context that is subtly written in people's minds that you have no idea how they're going to understand this. So let's go back to the Mongols, right? I think arguably no piece of history shows that one civilization has taken over more than, say, the Mongols. If you look at them, and what did they do? I mean, yes, they did initially install, Mongol rulers, but they actually were more, what would you call it, collaborative in the way that they ran some of these, what would you call them, protectorates. It's this idea that identity versus myth, right? If you have a foreigner, someone who doesn't know you or your culture, trying to oversee you, Southern America is even another example. If you look at the reaction to Reconstruction in the South, that I think caused more trauma and divide in America than maybe even the Civil War could have, because of these carpetbaggers coming down and as they said in the 1800s, right? They didn't understand us, our culture. But fast forward to our current century, or actually in this case, it's actually the previous century. So 3 centuries ago, they said this, that, oh my God, these Northerners are coming down and they don't understand. There's something to be said about the history. It's very nuanced because there was some very serious issues with what went on there. And they weren't looking out for who they said they were. It was looking out for their own self-interest. So fast forward another century, so this is 100 years ago, they said the exact same thing. In fact, I can give you an example. The book that was supposed to be To Kill a Mockingbird, Go Set a Watchman, Nell Carter was asked to rework the book because of these adult themes. Guess what the adult themes are? The exact same thing. In Go Set a Watchman, what's going on is the civil rights movement in the 60s, and there was the Civil Rights Act. And the book is about the idea that this group of advocates were coming down, not advocating for the betterment of a people, but advocating just for their own selfish self-aggrandizement, right? They just wanted their vote because they just wanted the power. They didn't care about bettering their people, as they say. And yet we've canceled this book because I think it had so many themes that are resonant still today in our society. There's no issue that's been resolved, I find. And yet they try to call Scout in the book a racist, or sorry, her father, Atticus Finch, a racist. But it's actually Scout in the book that is the problem. In fact, her uncle says that, no, it's you're the bigot. But the good news is you're a little bigot. Right? But we all are. I remember hearing a discussion of people talking about racism, and the only people in the conversation that were racist were the people that were claiming they weren't racist. Just by the things they said and how they reacted, these people are horrible. but it goes down to individuation, right? The shadow. I mean, you name it. It doesn't matter. William James, Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, Viktor Frankl, uh, oh God, Adler. There's a whole list of philosophers and psychiatrists, psychologists, you name it, who says you need to look inside yourself. This is why I recommend Hannah Arendt. She's a philosopher, but I think she's, once again, there is a very fine line between psychology and philosophy and religion. It's because all of this is an attempt to understand ourselves better. And Hannah Arendt understood that deep within inside all of us is the potential for evil. She called it the banality of evil, right? These Yahtzees weren't just, evil. We all have within us. We're a short. It's a joke in economics that we're just a couple meals away from savagery, right? The thin veil of civilization keeps arguably, like I said, with Lincoln when he spoke to the better angels of our nature. I mean, that automatically means that we have less than better angels in our nature. And until we integrate that side of us, I've experienced, as I've told you, I knew I was capable of things, but I thought I was infinitely compassionate, and there were certain things that I just refused to be possible. But I've seen it in so many people that I thought were better than I, more compassionate, more down to earth, right? Because I say this all the time. I'm a terrible Buddhist. I'm a terrible person because I struggle to be perfect. I struggle to be good, right? I freak out over silly, stupid little things that don't matter in comparison to some of the other things in this world. But that's the difference. I'm actually, I can't remember who said it. Someone said, I think it was Schopenhauer. He said, no writing is of value unless it shares. It might have been Hemingway, unless it shares something embarrassing about the author. Because it's so true. Who's going to be honest, right? Who's going to be honest to themselves, let alone when they're publishing their own ideas for other people to consume? It's individuation. This is the goal. It's to truly be who you are, to understand who you are. And it's what Jung warned us. Until we learn to integrate this shadow side of ourselves, until, as Nietzsche, and people misunderstand him still to this day, he was trying to remind us that these systems of thought, these toolkits that we have available to us, they're for those among us who are not ready to find for themselves what's a lie and what may or may not be true, but is worth believing. For those of us who aren't able to judge the label of good and evil, right and wrong, there's these cookie cutter systems of phenomenology, of idea. Well, you name these silly little words, hermeneutics. These are all cookie cutters or toolkits for people, a shortcut to understanding, right? So rather than you needing to understand what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, find your middle path. This allows you to begin walking the path. I liken it to a recent protocol I'm trying myself, that I'm taking a low dose of antihistamine in the hope that it can reduce my resting inflammatory level to get a little closer to this healing. But as I've said, since my autoinflammatory disease is tied to the skin, that being the largest organ, but also the first one to show issues with immune, inflammatory issues, that means you got to heal everything else in the body to begin healing the skin. But what's worse is every little thing you try to do, or any little thing that goes bad, it can take 30 days for you to see results, because your skin is on this long-term cycle of replacing. That's what individuation is. It's an ongoing struggle to understand who and what we are, right? I can't remember. I heard it quoted to a number of different people, but this idea that no man or woman or person, whatever you want to call it, can cross the same river twice because they're not the same person and it's not the same river. So it's incredibly difficult. But here's the good news: I've just found out, based on some of the science, that I was right. This crazy idea that I had, that they've been wrong. Right? They gave out the Nobel Prize for this insight, system one and system two thinking. Right? That we have an automatic mode because we're trying to save from this term they've invented, ego depletion, because we can't spend too much time paying attention, thinking, being focused. Well, recent studies have shown that's not true. That's not true. Actually, my theory is much closer to possibly the way we really are. And remember I said this, that I based it on dyslexics. I think the reason why dyslexics have some of this newfound insight that they've been testing, these neurodivergent therapists and researchers, I think it's because as a dyslexic, your world's lying to you constantly. I've mentioned this. Go look at something called the Rubin's vase. It's this thing that can look like a candlestick or two faces facing each other. But in the dyslexic world, we don't see one or the other as most normies do, and they might have to switch. The other example would be, say, FedEx. Right? Take a look at the FedEx logo. There's a saying that goes, when you see the arrow, you can't unsee it. But in reality, the dyslexic sees both the empty space and the filled space. What I liken it to is, again, goes back to the meaning of language. If you go back to India, the word, the idea, the character for zero, for hollow, for empty, for a passage, shunya. It made its way over to Japan, and there is a lookout in Japan where it's just a stone circle that's been carved. And the way I try to explain it is, everywhere else in the world nowadays, it seems, people see the donut hole as an empty space, when what we're meant to do is to see the hole and the donut as part of one system. There is no separation between the hole and the donut. And that's individuation, right? Shunya, at once, it means emptiness, but it also means, one of my favorite quotes by Carl Jung from Modern Man in Search of a Soul. He says, modern man stands at the edge of a void, a chasm, if you will. But it's not the idea of being at risk of falling in or falling out, right? This idea of the abyss, a void, a nothingness, an emptiness, is a potentiality. It's anything can happen. A void, like Nietzsche was trying to explain, that maybe you shed off the camel for the lion that can tear down what doesn't serve us to be better than our previous selves, to someday be the child, right? To be that modern man or woman or them, they, them, these, or it doesn't matter. We're all human beings, all trying to individuate, find out who we truly are, our true myth, not somebody else's identity, somebody else's story they've written. But you need to write your own story. You need to stand at the edge of that void, that abyss. You need to stare into it, but not have someone else stare back. But know when you're staring into that abyss, what you're really doing is staring into yourself. Right? Because what you need to do is figure out who and what you are, where you want to go, what you want to be. But none of that happens out of context, as they say, right? You didn't fall out of a coconut tree. So our problems are not pride, because, I mean, pride is just ego delusion. Because who has anything to be proud of, right? Because being better than anyone else is nothing to be proud of. Only being better than your previous self. But how many people are really doing that? I know some of my professors are awesome because, or teachers, gurus, whatever you want to call them, are awesome because most of the ones that I follow will be honest and admit that they struggle in so many areas. It's like St. Augustine, of all people, said that he was a terrible sinner before he became the bishop. What was he, Bishop of North Africa or something like that? But he was still an incredible sinner. And I might be getting this wrong, so please don't quote me here. But the idea is still sound, that some of the greatest thinkers and philosophers were the most troubled. I mean, even Nietzsche, believe it or not, was thankful of his horrible disease, and as I should be as well, that he says if it wasn't for the horrible disease, right, he wouldn't have, I don't know how he would put it. I let me speak for him. I think even though it's horrible, you got to remember that Nietzsche thought suffering had an end, right? Kind of Bismarck, right? The ends justify the means in reverse, right? So suffering is justified, and he criticized Christians because not all suffering is justified, right? It has to be suffering in the goal of being better, the Ubermensch. Like, you see it, how all this comes together, and it should be just blatantly obvious that the idea is simply to do better, be better than your previous self. None of the other stuff really matters, right? Because you don't have to believe this, that, or the other thing. The only thing you need to believe is that you are no better than your next person. You're all struggling to be better people and live your lives. And until we understand this idea that we're a we and an us, not an I and a you, worse yet, an I and an it. It's an I and a thou, as Martin Buber was getting at, because it's like what I say with an we and an us, right? My pronouns as a believer in this panentheism, this idea that divinity infuses absolutely everything. And this is what blows me away. I was just what I would call a Vajrayana, like a tantric Buddhist, I guess you'd say, because, you know, I'm not what you would call an atheist Buddhist. I'm more of a non-theist Buddhist, this idea, you know. But again, language fails, especially in English. It really is much simpler to explain in other languages. This idea that I don't believe there is some extant creator God or something like that. This idea that this divinity, this providence is shared amongst us, right? And I'm even weirder than that. I don't even make judgments when it comes to real or unreal of conventional existence. I'm actually right in the middle, the Madhyamaka, this idea that is everything an illusion or is it real? Does it exist? And I'm right in the middle going, it kind of is both in a sense, right? It's the tetralemma, the cettascoti. It's real and unreal, both, right? Because there are aspects of this world that could be absolutely plainly obvious to us, but we're so deluded by all these masks we wear or all of this reactionary, right? Ressentiment, as Nietzsche said, we're reacting to things in the present as if in the present, we're reacting in the present based on a template from the past, right? We're not reacting to what's going on in the present. As I've said, trauma, and this is why Nietzsche was so awesome, because remember, Traum is German for dream. Trauma is just this idea of a dream that we're living, right? As Nietzsche said in Zarathustra, right? Colored vapor, the world seemed to me before, a enchanted God is how I translate that, because that's what we are. That's what we are. We are disenchanted with the world. And so everything is colored vapor instead of, right, in German and Hebrew, this word for vapor or smoke can also be your soul. Right? So do you get this idea that the world is here to infuse us with the discernment to understand good from evil, right and wrong, but to discern who we truly are, right? Individuation is hamavdil in Hebrew, or it's samadhi in you can go around the world. Self-actualization, but within the context of a truth that you don't have to believe in something specifically beyond yourself, but you have to admit there is more to us, to you, to I, than just what we can measure, right? It's the idea of Gestalt or Gestalten. It's a German word. It's right. This, we are more than the sum of our parts, but it's also an idea of creation, right? Same as the German word for what nowadays most people would know as treasure, Schätzen. But what it really is this idea, in Nietzsche's mouth, this idea of what we value is based on our own evaluation. So what we treasure is what we value. What we value is what we create in this world, because meaning is a creation of our values, of our presence, of our interaction with the world, of our vita activa and our vita contemplativa. Here's Hannah Arendt again, but this idea that until we can get the karma yoga, right, and jnana yoga getting work together, right, till we get wisdom, action, and action to work together, we're not going to know who we truly are. And until we know who we truly are we really agents in the world? If we're not agents in the world, we're not acting, we're not changing, we're that non-player character again. But I guess the final takeaway is I'm going to treat my failure yesterday as a lesson learned, right? I made the biggest mistake. I could have did everything else perfectly well and made the one little mistake, and I allowed that one little mistake to snowball into yet another huge mistake, putting myself behind, I would argue months, but we'll see if we can just make it, a few days or even not at all. But that's what individuation is, right? It's a struggle. It's a struggle up a sandy hill, right? Right, we're gonna find a lot of dead ends, and a lot of that is going to be ourselves misguiding ourself. But I think that truly is the way forward. If we understand that no matter what we hold apart, there's more to us that is shared than we will ever know, or we will ever be able to gauge, to measure, to judge, to prove. So the idea of amor fati, to love your fate, to fides, faith, pistis, hope, potential, trust. Trust is all about value. Value is all about valuation, evaluation. Evaluation is just being present. Being present is being active and interactive. All of it boils down to Jung's individuation, and all the other stuff are just, well, the grammar that we use. Philosophy, psychology, religion, culture, society, they all seem to be just a grammar to help us contextualize. I mean, that's what language is, right? It's to help us try to get these ideas out. But the reason why it's so difficult, my favorite quote from St. John of the Cross, and I'm simplifying it here again, and it's from Spanish, so I'm allowed. But this idea that these things, these understandings, are not understood when sought, but only when practiced and then found. And it's so true. I mean, I'm reading that. I found a new translation of "My Imitation of Christ" is how it was translated from the Latin, or the French book from what is it, Gabriel Bossis, Lui et Moi, him and I, he and I. It's all about an individuation, to understand who you are, to understand yourself better so you can interact with others better, so you can actually show compassion. I mean, that's why I am so anti-monastic. That's why I'm so anti-metta meditation. You can't just sit down and cultivate compassion or loving kindness. This is not how this works, right? As Nietzsche said, the thought experiment, what need would we have of language if we were alone in the woods? Well, what need would we have of the individual? What would we have? Right? Because without an I and a thou, there would be no compassion. Because arguably, especially here in the West, we have this level of self-loathing. Imagine where we'd be if we were allowed to just let that thought algorithm run. That's our negativity bias run wild. That's our modern malaise, right? If you think about it, there is just too much going on. Someone recently mentioned this idea of every place in this world wants you to download an app. So imagine having 200 or 300 different apps, all, trying to notify you. I mean, I've seen that with YouTube. In no small part, YouTube is on its way out because of little things, like not the fact that there's just too many ads. I mean, I've had more ads on a video than the video was long, right? Never mind that without an ad blocker on YouTube, the website's almost unusable. It crashes, it freezes, it's garbage because they try to serve up so many ads and so much metrics and so much tracking and so much crap instead of just providing people what they need, what they want, right? YouTube originally started because bandwidth and technology and websites and servers and all that stuff was difficult. Well, now that's just easy. So what is their use case? Right? Well, it was for you to follow the people you want to follow for their content, but because they keep messing with the algorithms and the subscription stuff, it doesn't matter what you've set. I mean, I'm seeing regularly being unsubscribed from different channels, but it doesn't matter because, I mean, I'm subscribed to 1,000 different channels. If I'm not allowed to set which ones I want to see and when and why, how is YouTube going to know? Right? So that's why I'm so negative with these cookie cutter paths. I do understand what they're here for. Right? It's really hard to find the bandwidth to figure out who you really are, what you trust, what you want to believe in. It really is difficult. but nobody else can do that for you. That's the toughest part. People ask all the time why doctors don't keep reminding people you need to use diet and lifestyle first before pills and medical intervention. But no, that's not something that people want to hear. So doctors just stop telling them. It's the same as the Buddhists. I mean, I don't understand this. I told you there's a sect of Buddhists that charge $15 per meditation appointment, and so I'm of two minds there. It's really, you're charging for meditation, okay? But I've seen lots of places that they call suggested donations. But there's also the argument, yeah, it should be 15, or maybe Transcendental Meditation is right, charging $1,500 to help you pick your your mantra or your healing sound. Because technically, it only takes a couple minutes to teach you how to meditate, how to be a contemplative. Because it's not about teaching you these, involved steps, right? It's not like memorizing the rosary. It's a simple concept. It's zazen or sati sampajanya. It's to remember. Always remember. Don't be a jerk. Are you being a jerk? Repeat. Right? Don't make yourself the center of the universe. Don't treat others as separate from yourself. And until we get to that, I and thou, we're going to continue to suffer individually. In fact, this is what I mean by this poorly translated quote by Carl Jung, that he said that all of his patients who are suffering from a malaise in later life are over 35. They were all healed by adopting a religious view of or in life. I mean, arguably, it doesn't matter in this case, right? A religious view in life, but it's a religious view of life. So it's not adopting religion like some people seem to misunderstand it. It's simply what Martin Buber took a whole book to recommend, whereas the Upanishads needed one line. The line is in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The line is in the Bhagavad Gita. This idea of our goal is to see ourselves in others and to see aspects of others in ourselves, right? To see our shared divinity rather than our divided dharma. Yeah. Well, we'll leave it at that. I just wanted to share, and I can't believe I went that long. I apologize. But yeah, I think this month of June, the biggest thing we should be talking about is not pride, but the fact that we have so little to be proud of, that we need to start being better than our previous selves. And we need to be raising all boats, not sinking some to raise others.